If you listen carefully, at the end, you'll be someone else. Jayen's eyes scanned everyone that got onto the plane, nervously looking over their faces as they passed his seat in the 13th row. By the time the doors closed, his nerves were frayed, and he was finally able to sit back and relax. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 370. With service from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, we are cleared for takeoff and are expecting to be in the air in less than 5 minutes. The flight attendant went on with her announcement, but Jayen didn't care. He was exhausted from the past 24 hours and had barely any time to gather himself. Now that he could sit back and think, the horror of what he had experienced started to take over. More than anything, Jayen regretted entangling himself with Hei Ling and Heping Kwambu. About 6 months ago, Jayen was at a local mall looking for a new job after being fired. There he had met Hei Ling and had instantly gravitated towards the man. Hei Ling had been recruiting members for Heping Kwambu, a small group of people that touted themselves as activists for world peace. Hei Ling spoke of peace and unity, and while everyone else just walked past and ignored him, Jayen decided to stop and listen. He listened for a few minutes, at first with an idle interest. But as Hei Ling spoke, Jayen felt the words take root in his soul. The next few months were a whirlwind. Hei Ling and Heping Kwambu got Jayen a job working in a factory that one of the higher-ups owned. Jayen was supposed to be working as a floor manager at the factory, but most of his working day was traveling with Hei Ling, recruiting for the organization and doing other projects for the group. Heping Kwambu was all about uniting the world and creating peace, and Jayen and Hei Ling worked hard at expressing that to the world. As a junior member, Jayen would work under Hei Ling every day, and the two grew extremely close. Hei Ling had an inherent gravitational pull and was consistently able to make the people around him happy and comfortable in their lives. Jayen became captivated with him, feeling alive when he was around the man. He began noticing that Hei Ling was uncannily lucky in a lot of things. He had this innate ability to have things go his way, and it seemed to rub off on Jayen. They would go off and do charitable work, helping impoverished communities throughout Beijing, and Jayen felt fulfilled for the first time in his life. He was making steady money with which he could feed his family, and he and his family were very happy, for a while. Upon Hei Ling's request, Jayen kept his involvement with the organization quiet from his family. But more and more he had felt that he wanted to bring them into the group. Hei Ling was insistent that they stay separate from the group because Jayen was not fully established as a member yet, and so Jayen worked even harder to establish himself. 5 months after meeting Hei Ling, Jayen was given the opportunity to establish himself as a senior member of the organization. Hei Ling would be going on a trip to Malaysia to build roots for the second chapter of the organization in Malaysia. They arrived in Kuala Lumpur in mid-February and were working for a little less than a month when the truth about the group was revealed. Hei Ling and Jayen were looking into buying a warehouse for the chapter house of Heping Kwambu in Kuala Lumpur. They had found a building in a quiet spot of town that was perfect for them, and were negotiating with the owner, who did not seem fond of them. Jae-in was surprised, as he had never seen anyone react so negatively to He-Ling's pitch. But the warehouse owner was not having it. "I'm not going to sell my building to some creepy cult. You guys are going to have to find somewhere else to go," the owner had said. "We are not a cult," said Jae-in. "We are a group of people trying to unite the world and create world peace." Jae-in was becoming exasperated at the owner's accusations when He-Ling put his hand over Jae-in's hand softly. "Let me take care of this, my friend." He-Ling gave a soft smile to Jae-in. "Why don't you go cool down outside while I finish up here?" Jae-in suddenly felt a wave of calm wash over him as he got up. He went outside and paced around for a few minutes, but eventually grew tired of waiting for He-Ling. He went back inside, turned the corner into the owner's office, and froze. He-Ling had his hand on the owner's forehead, and the man was convulsing in his chair. He-Ling's eyes were ink black, and as the man stopped convulsing and went limp, they cleared up, regaining their normal color. He-Ling turned to see Jae-in in the doorway and smiled. "I think the warehouse will be a perfect place for our new chapter." He-Ling smiled at Jae-in. Did you kill him?" Jae-in started to back away from He-Ling, who had stood up and was walking towards him. "We must do what is necessary to promote the organization's interest and unite the world, Jae-in." He-Ling still had the same smile that he always had, but Jae-in was no longer comforted by it. He turned and took off running, realization dawning on him about the true nature of Heping Kwambu and He-Ling. What he had originally seen as a charismatic man in a group promoting world peace was replaced with a dark cult and an eerily powerful man who would do terrible things to promote his vision. Jae-in tried not to think about it now, letting himself relax when the plane reached cruising altitude. He placed the magazine he had been absent-mindedly flipping through on the empty seat next to him and got up to go to the bathroom. He walked down the aisle, glancing at the people on the flight, double-checking for He-Ling, but pretty confident that he had seen everyone that got on the plane. He returned and sat down thinking about taking a nap when the person sitting next to him in the window seat tapped him on the shoulder. Jae-in turned and almost leapt out of his skin. He-Ling was sitting next to him, smiling. "Hello, Jae-in," He-Ling said calmly. Unlike Jae-in, who was wrung out and disheveled from the past day, He-Ling was clean and collected, his short hair combed high and tight and his suit pressed as usual. "How did you get here?" Jae-in croaked out. His throat was dry and his heart had started racing. He began looking up and down the aisle for some assistance when He-Ling put his hand on Jae-in's shoulder. "It's going to be okay. Calm down, my friend." Jae-in turned back to see He-Ling smiling at him, and for a second he began to feel a calming wave go through his body. He-Ling seemed to morph back into the trusted friend that he had first met, his evil eyes softening and his cruel grin becoming a comforting smile. Jae-in began to relax, but as he turned back, the vision of the warehouse owner's limp body shot through his mind. He tensed back up, his heart pounding even harder than before as he wiggled under He-Ling's hand. Jae-in shuddered, thinking of the ink-black eyes that he had seen in He-Ling's face earlier. "What are you going to do to me?" "I've talked with some of the higher-ups at Heping Kwambu," he said, "and we have decided that you should become a senior member. You are being invited to the headquarters." He-Ling checked his watch, then looked back toward Jae-in. We should actually be on the way soon. Jae-in began to sweat. He had heard of the mysterious headquarters, which was rumored to be in the middle of the Indian Ocean and only accessible by boat or plane. I just want to go home to my family, Jae-in quietly pleaded, his hands sweating. Please, just let me go home to my family. After our trip to the headquarters, we will allow you to return home, don't worry. Healing spoke calmly as he sat back in his seat. Speaking of which, I've got to take care of something. Healing's eyes slowly blackened, the whites filling with an inky darkness as his head rolled back. Suddenly, the blackness subsided and his head snapped forward. Everything is under control. Don't worry, Jae-in. Healing began to sit back, seemingly not worried about Jae-in or anything else on the plane. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We've had an issue with our radio transmitter, and we are going to have to return to Kuala Lumpur to make sure that the aircraft is properly equipped to fly to Beijing. On behalf of Malaysia Airlines and the entire crew, we apologize and will do whatever we can to remedy this situation. The flight attendant's voice seemed worried, and a chill went down Jae-in's spine. Did you do this? Jae-in whispered to Healing. Without answering, he sat back with a calm smile on his face, causing a spike of panic through Jae-in. For an hour, Jae-in sat next to Healing, wondering what to do and if he could find someone on this flight to help him. He tried signaling a flight attendant, but every time one came over, Healing would wake up and make sure Jae-in couldn't say anything. Jae-in looked down at his watch, hoping they were almost at Kuala Lumpur, so he could escape from Healing. We won't be reaching Kuala Lumpur, my friend. Healing smiled knowingly. Heping Kwambu is far more powerful than you could ever know. But don't worry, you will understand when we reach the headquarters. Jae-in began to look around, panicked, and noticed another man looking at him. I'm not the only operative on this flight, Jae-in, chuckled Healing, pointing at the man that was looking at them. Healing gave him a thumbs up, and the man sat back in his chair. Just like Healing's earlier, his eyes darkened, becoming wholly ink black. That's Senior Member Hu, and he will be flying us down to the headquarters, said Healing, pointing at another man sitting a few rows in front of them. That's Sean Lee, another operative, who will be making sure that nothing goes wrong on our trip. How are you doing this? Jae-in shuddered as he noticed more people with black eyes on the plane. Just relax, Jae-in. We will be at the headquarters in about 7 hours. You should get some sleep. Healing patted Jae-in's knee and then lay back and closed his eyes. Jae-in's mind started racing as he tried to think of a plan to get off this plane, or to stop Healing and his cult from getting him to the headquarters. You can't do anything to stop this, Jae-in, said Healing calmly with his eyes closed. Jae-in had resigned himself to death. There was no way he'd let these monsters take him to the headquarters, but at least he could bring them down with him. It had been 6 hours since Healing had revealed his plan, and Jae-in had been unable to even take solace in his own mind, as it seemed Healing could read all of his thoughts. He decided that he may be able to think things through in the bathroom, so he got up and went to the back of the plane. The entire flight he had been careful not to think too closely about his plan, but Healing did not seem to have any issue with him just going over the events of the flight in his head. Now that he had some space from Healing, he started to piece it all together. The first man that he had seen, Hu, must be controlling the plane or the pilot somehow, and the others must be in charge of keeping the air marshals and flight attendants from causing any problems. He-Ling did not seem like he was doing anything at the moment, but if Jae-in was going to make a move, He-Ling was going to be the one he'd have to avoid. Jae-in took a pen out of his pocket and gripped it in his fist as he walked down the aisle. His heart was racing as he thought of what he was going to have to do. He spotted Hu in his seat, still black-eyed and sitting with his head back against the seat. He glanced at He-Ling, who was still sitting back with his eyes closed. As Jae-in turned towards Hu, He-Ling's eyes shot open and he started to stand up. Jae-in lunged at Hu, jabbing the pen into the black eyes as hard as he could. Dark blood sprayed out and started to bubble from the eye as some of the passengers started to scream. Jae-in pulled the pen out and jabbed again at Hu's neck, but was stopped before he could make contact. Hu was shaking and spewing blood out of his eye, but his other eye was still black and he seemed to still be in whatever trance he had been in the entire time. Jae-in was thrown off of Hu into the aisle in front of him by an invisible force. He-Ling stood over him, his eyes blackening as he started to maniacally chuckle. Jae-in's heart dropped. The plane was still flying evenly on course, and Jae-in stabbing Hu had barely seemed to affect the man. All around him, passengers were screaming. He-Ling slowly leaned towards Jae-in, lifting him from the ground as if he weighed nothing. "I told you that you couldn't stop this." He-Ling's teeth were clenched in a sneer and his black eyes bored into Jae-in. What are you people?" Jae-in started to choke as He-Ling's hand squeezed around his neck. "We are Heping Kwambu, Jae-in, and we only want one thing." He-Ling started to squeeze more, and Jae-in's vision started to blur. "Peace," He-Ling hissed. Jae-in kicked out, his foot sinking into He-Ling's stomach and causing He-Ling to drop him. He-Ling staggered back, his eyes lightening slightly. Jae-in saw the opportunity and lunged back at Hu, wrapping his hands around the man's throat and squeezing with all his strength. He dug his nails into the man's neck, and the inky blackness drained out of Hu's one good eye. The plane suddenly dipped, flinging Jae-in off of Hu and into the ceiling. "Get back into control, Hu," bellowed He-Ling, his eyes clear. Hu was groaning through his grasps for breath, one hand planted over his bleeding eye. "I can't," he moaned. The passengers were all screaming as the plane continued to plummet. Jae-in reached for his seat, pulling himself down away from He-Ling, who was reaching out towards him. Suddenly, the plane hit the water, rocking the cabin and sending Jae-in and He-Ling flying. Jae-in's face slammed into the ground and a bright flash of light crossed his eyes. He tried to stand up, disoriented as the plane rocked in the water. As he gained a sense of himself, he saw He-Ling standing up and turning towards him. "You fool," spat He-Ling at Jae-in. "You could have had this power. You could have been one of us, but instead you chose to die." He-Ling threw his hands out, and the plane started to shudder. Cracks started forming in the fuselage, and the cabin began to flood with water. The passengers started struggling out of their chairs and scrambling towards the emergency exits when He-Ling clenched his fists and punched towards the ground. The walls of the plane cracked more, and the plane started to descend into the water. As it filled up, Jae-in started moving towards He-Ling, trying to stop him and maybe save some of the passengers. Before he could do anything, he was hit in the side by another one of the cult operatives. Almost maniacally, He-Ling kept punching the ground, cracking the plane's walls more and more. Jae-in could feel this wrath, his determination in every punch. He was not going to stop. The water at that point was up to Jae-yin's waist. His muscles were aching and his head was pounding. He-ling was going to kill all of them, and Jae-yin couldn't do anything about it. More and more water filled up the plain, and all Jae-yin could think about was that Heping Kwan-bu had won, and he was going to die because of them. Jae-yin remembered his wife and kids, and his eyes filled with tears as water claimed him. And Malaysia Flight 370 sank towards the sea floor.